Hello, everyone. This is our psychology study group. Tonight, we are going to do complex archetypes, and I would like to hand it over now to Anahy.
Thank you, Fabrício. Hello, everyone. So I'll just, it's a very interesting topic, and we have lots of examples. So I'll just go ahead, okay? And we'll see if we have some time for discussion or questions later on. Just share my screen with you. Is that okay, Fabrício?
Yep, we can see perfectly.
Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, complexes and archetypes. So I've shown you before this Jung's map of the psyche, this scheme. And here, just for us to remember, okay? It's a simple one, of course, but I think it's nice to start this topic. So we have here the whole of the psyche, okay? And we have in green, actually, we have the ego represented in green, but I would say like consciousness, and probably the ego would be the star, the yellow star, the center of consciousness, right? And we have in brown the personal unconscious. And this author has highlighted the two main, that we are going to be talking later in the course, two main complexes related to the ego, the persona in white and the shadow here in the personal unconscious, because the shadow is basically unconscious and the persona is mostly conscious, okay? And we have the self represented here and the collective unconscious, so the archetypal level of consciousness, of the unconscious, sorry, okay? I'll show you another another map later. Oh, here comes. So I like very much this Stephen's, this author's model, the way he draws Jung's model of the psyche, because it's simpler and it's nice to see the complexes and the archetypes, okay? So we have in this sphere here, very thin, consciousness, right? And the center of consciousness, so the ego that we all know by now. And then we have the personal unconscious here. Remember the onion with different layers? So we have the personal unconscious with the complexes, the C for complexes, okay, represented. Then you can notice that the complexes are in the personal unconscious. And we have here in the center, in the center, the A for archetypes, okay, that, and you can see that they are in the collective unconscious, okay. Of course, the only problem with this drawing, this model, the way it's represented, is that the collective unconscious looks like it's smaller than the personal unconscious, which is exactly the opposite. But it's just for us to have an idea. And actually, remember, everyone, that there is no actual separation between all these layers. They are all interconnected. We cannot see or we cannot have a perception where it's the end or the beginning of the other, this psychic structures, but it's just a representation so we can develop our reasoning and our thoughts about Jung's model. Okay, so the basic thing here to remember is that the complex, see that they are related to the archetypes. See here. So we say that the in the center of all complexes, there is an archetype. The archetype is the core of the complex, okay? And you see that the complex, it's in the personal unconscious, connected to the archetype that it's in the collective unconscious. It's all going to become clear, don't worry. We go step by step and you're all going to get used with these terms. But just so that we can, have an idea of what Jung was talking about. And the last thing that I want you to notice is that the ego is connected to the self. We haven't even exactly seen the self. We're going to be studying in some classes ahead of this one. But I just wanted for you to pay attention that there is an ego-self axis, okay? This line here represents the ego-self axis. They are closely related, deeply related, and we are going to understand all of this in the next classes. So this is the word association test, okay? So Jung, it's an example. So Jung was, remember that when we talk about Jung's life, he was working in the beginning of the 20th century, until 1908. So for almost 8 years, he was working at the Burgosli Clinic, the hospital, sorry, related to the medical school in Zurich. And the word association test, they were already studying this test, but Jung worked a lot with the patients of the clinic. And I wrote to you all some sentences that Jung talked about in the collective works, his collective works, the books that we all have to read when we are doing analytical development, okay? The thing is that in the structure and dynamics of the psyche, one of his books from the collective works, Jung says that the association tests aimed to establish the average speed of the reactions of the subject to a set of words, usually like 100 words, and the qualities of those reactions. And Jung discovered then the autonomous behavior of the psyche and what he called feeling-tuned complexes, which had been registered before as failures to react. You see here on the left, the stimulus word, for instance, to sing, and then the person would say nice, for instance, and then they would register the time for reaction, in seconds. And also if there was a reproduction later on when they asked again after, like in the end, after some time, in the end of the test, they would go back and see what the person remembered. So you see when they said dad, and then you can see that the time for reaction grows, okay? And the reaction, the word that the person gives back, it's like awful, totally the opposite. And then later on, when they try to make the person remember, oh, go ahead, remember what you said when I said dad, for instance, and the person couldn't remember. And you see that, for instance, this word here, long, then the time for reaction grows even more. And the person says the time, the journey, and cannot remember. So if we observe only these first words, we can see that the person there's a underlying background to these words, okay, that they are full of energy, of psychic energy, and of emotions and probably images, memories related to them, even if these images and memories and emotions are not, because this is very quick, so even if they are not conscious, especially because they are not conscious, okay. So the association test, says Jung, is of general interest. This is Jung's words, in that it reproduces the psychic situation of the dialogue, okay? And at the same time, the inner dialogue, and at the same time makes fairly accurate quantitative and qualitative evaluation possible. So instead of questions, the subject is confronted with the vague, ambiguous, and therefore disconcerting stimulus words, and instead of an answer, he has to react with a single word. This is all Jung saying. The accurate observation of the reaction disturbances enables us to discover things that point to the unspoken background, what happens to the unspoken background. So what happens in the association test also happens in every discussion between two people. Okay, this is totally Jung saying to us, telling us all of this, okay? And I wanted to give you Jung words, okay, when he talks about the complex, because immediately when I was reading again his explanations about the complex, I remember about our social medias, for instance. So they are full of complexes, people, because actually there's not this cancellation or whatever. People aren't really listening to each other. So we can see that there are a lot of complexes involved, especially because it's kind of like an association test, you know. Sometimes I don't even, for instance, if people are discussing with each other through the social media and going against what somebody else is saying. For instance, if this was an open class, right, Fabricio, and we had an open chat, of course, somebody would would have an opinion and would say this and that, and probably some of you would be upset, or if I could read what people were saying in the chat, I would be upset. For instance, I would start saying something, or you would start writing something in the chat, and what would happen, it's probably, very probably, a lot of our complexes would be activated. Jung used the word constellated, okay? Why did Jung use the word constellated? He says that this term simply expresses the fact that the outward situation releases a psychic process in which certain contents gather together and prepare for action. Let's fight, okay? When we say that a person is constellated, and a lot of persons are constellated in the social medias, we mean that he, she has taken up a position from which she can be expected to react in a quite different way, okay, that the person would do usually. The constellation is an automatic process which happens involuntarily and which no one can stop of his own accord. We lose control. We can think, remember the mechanisms of defense that we talked about last class, okay? We think we are in control, but we are not, because this is unconscious contents that simply open the door of consciousness and take over consciousness, okay? So the constellated contents are definite complexes possessing their own specific energy. That's why we are going to see some more definitions of the complexes. So that's why when there is a constellation of complexes, the discussion loses its objective character, according to Jung, and its real purpose. You see how awful all this discussion in the social medias are, because the objective character and the real purpose are totally lost to the complexes. Since the constellated complex frustrates the intentions of the speakers and may even put answers into their mouths, which they can no longer remember afterwards. So even in WhatsApp, for instance, the WhatsApp, okay, we know everybody supposedly in a group. In our group here, we don't know everybody, right, Fabrizio? But if the WhatsApp would, was open and we knew everybody, we could meet in person and we knew each other. Even in this way, if we started a discussion or somebody would say, even with the emojis and the smiling faces or the sad faces, doesn't matter, people. We are talking about unconscious contents. So if, for instance, somebody would say something like, another person would be in automatic response, even if the person, especially because the person is not attentive to her own psychic process, right? We are answering and talking really quickly. So what happens is that a complex is constellated and we lose control. And it's kind of contamination. Everybody loses control, okay? That's why until we are, really, I don't know, in this life, maybe I cannot promise, but that's why you won't find me in social media, because I keep seeing a lot, seeing a lot of complex constellation, even in my own family. I think everybody here has had some kind of experience with friends and close family members. For instance, the pandemic, that we were all very stressed. So everything could, a complex could constellate very quickly. And then a lot of people would go out of the, of the WhatsApp group or stop talking to each other and this and that. So I like this image, King Arthur and, his fellows in armor or whatever, the round table, like an example of complex. So some other definition. So a complex would be an image of a certain psychic situation with a strong emotional charge, incompatible with the disposition or habitual attitude of the conscience. Partial aspects of the psyche, this or another way of looking at the complex. So partial aspects of the psyche dissociated due to trauma or emotional shock, One of the most frequent causes, according to Jung, for this to occur is a moral conflict, but we are talking of inner, not, outer, not the cultural, moral, or whatever, but something deep inside the person. So a difficulty in accepting our aspect involved in the conflict would cause an immediate dissociation. Okay, the ego, remember the mechanism of defense, the ego will protect itself and we'll see that this content goes back or goes definitely trying to be definitely, but goes back to the unconscious or goes to the unconscious if it was not unconscious, but usually, or if it was trying to surface, but usually, of course, we're talking about unconscious contents, okay? So the pronounced unconsciousness regarding the complexes gives them great autonomy. That's why we need to know ourselves deeply. Okay, one of the main reasons for our interaction with one another. So people, Jung says that people have complexes, but what isn't well known is that complexes can have us if they simply, open the door of consciousness and take over, then they will have us. So complexes are subject to the control of consciousness up to a certain limit. With some effort of will, we can repress them, which is often done. Remember the mechanism of defense. But at the first favorable opportunity, they resurface with all their original strength. Thus, an active complex puts us for a time in a state of non-freedom, of obsessive thoughts and compulsive actions. Okay, that's why I thought of the Hitchcock's movie called Marnie, that it's not a spoiler because it has decades old, okay, with Tippi Hedren and Sean Connery, that you can, people that haven't watched yet can find easily. And actually, she looks like a very nice young lady, but through the movie, here appears, this is also Marnie, under the name of the movie, with the black hair, okay? So she changed the color of the hair constantly because she robs her employers. And but she has actually, it's not much of a consciousness of what she's doing. Remember here, complexes are subject to the control of consciousness up to a certain limit, okay? So she has a certain consciousness because she changed her name going from a job to the other, and she knows what she has done, kind of. She tries, remember rationalization, one of the most dangerous mechanisms of defense, as Joanna tells us, because it makes us, go very far from our own truth and from the possibility to look at our shadows and problems, okay? So actually, Marnie rationalizes all her behavior and denies a lot of stuff, that she has problems, that she has any childhood trauma, which is, of course, she has. She just can't remember. And the thing is that she can't stand the color red. And we are going to see in the movie why she can't stand. And it's all because of her childhood trauma. And the mother was also involved. The mother that is very cold and very always apart from Marnie. And then when she goes and get this job with Sean Connery in his company, she ends up marrying the guy. I'm not going to tell everything in case some of you haven't seen it. But actually he helps her to heal. But he helps because, of course, he has his own complexes, right? Everybody in the movie has a lot of complexes and are not aware of them. But actually, it's a process of healing that the couple have. He supposedly being the healthier one, but of course not, because otherwise he wouldn't be so attracted to her. And we can, maybe Fabrizio can remind me, we can also talk about the movie, but I'm going to talk about others when we talk about the anima and the animus, the complexes, okay? I think it's a nice way to, for us to have an idea what Jung was talking about. So, of course, he is projecting something onto Marnie and she's projecting onto him. A lot of things, but he's interested in biology previously, and he sees some of Marnie's behavior, especially during a storm when they are both working together alone. So he decided he was going to observe her. Of course, he falls in love, and then we are going to see the healing process. But here is one after they are married, and she can't stand for him to touch her and all this stuff. And of course, when he realized she almost killed herself in the process. And here is the scene where he's he wrote, has read a book of the Freud, of course, Freudian book, or mainly problems with sexual life in females and this and that. But as I remember, the book was. But of course, he has read about the association word test. And he does that with Marnie. And when and she was joking that scene on the left, you Freud, me Jane, she's joking. But then he goes on, and then he talks about sex, the word sex, and she says female, masculine, feminine, and then she kind of loses herself. If you get near me, I'll slap your filthy face. And then he goes and quickly says red. And then it's when she starts crying, gets desperate, and say, oh, help me, please, okay? So she had a very strong emotional reaction, sorry. And I wanted to give you this as an example of what Jung was talking about, the complexes, and that we don't have the control of our complexes when they constellate, okay? As here, Marnie loses control because he was doing a word association test with her, kind of, okay? Let's never do it at home. It's just a movie. And actually, with the development of other therapeutic and techniques and analysis, it's not done anymore, not like that anyway. But it was in the beginning of Freud and Jung and other authors, in the beginning of the development and actually the observation of the ways that our psyche works, okay? So Jung develops his theory of the complex actually when he was still with Freud. So for Freud, that was great because Freud agreed totally. And actually, he had been studying and teaching this up up to this point, okay, and of course Freud's focus was on the father complex, the mother complex, and the child, the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex in women. But Jung went further, because Jung sees that the complexes are actually, a lot of complexes are organized. I got you another definition. So they are organized set of memories, associations, fantasies, expectations, and behavior patterns or tendencies around a core element, which is accompanied by strong emotions. This, I thought this definition was a little easier for someone that has not had contact with Jung's terms, okay? So now we go to the core of the complexes. The objective psyche, or the depth of the soul, where we all know is the collective unconscious. So we leave Sir Arthur and his knights, and we go to the planets, because Jung said that the collective unconscious is a dimension of unknown proportions, dimensions, okay? And so for him, the archetypes, just move here a little bit. The archetypes, so are psychic structures common to all of us that together constitute the archaic heritage of humanity in the depth of our souls. So they initiate neuropsychic, they are neuropsychic centers that have the capacity. That initiate word is typed wrong. Just forget the initiate in the beginning. So they are neuropsychic centers. Why neuropsychic? Because they are from the psychic, they are in the middle of the psychic dimensions, okay? That there is no material, the psychic dimension is not material, but they connect the psychic dimension with our body, our brain, with our neurological system. So one of the ways to define archetypes is that they are neuropsychic centers that have the capacity to initiate, control, and mediate the common behavioral characteristics and typical experiences of all human beings, all of us. We are talking about the depths of the soul, where we are all really one, okay? All brothers and sisters, all coming from the same source. So the individual psyche is not just a product of personal experience. It also involves this transpersonal dimension, which manifests itself in universal patterns and images, such as can be found in all mythologies and religions of the world. You see, our differences are only cultural, and our differences are conditioned to where we were born, some characteristics of our bodies, the skin and whatever, other characteristics, and cultural because of being born in different cultures. But in the depths of our souls, there are universal patterns and images that can be found in all mythologies and religions of the world. In this dimension, there is no sense of feeling disconnected to each other. there would be no bullying. I mean, you know, there would be no reason for discussion because we are deeply connected to each other. So in the book Reflecting the Soul, the word archetype, the authors say, means an original model, a kind of matrix of human behavior. Archetypes are primordial and structural elements of our psyche. They manifest themselves on a personal level through complexes. Every complex has an archetype as its core, as we were talking about. So they manifest themselves on a personal level through complexes and collectively through cultural and characteristics. Okay? So that's what I was talking about. They will manifest themselves in this personal level through our own experience, but collective, and also collectively, if we are in a group of people, okay, East and West, for instance. So we have different ways of thinking. This is a wonderful class that Joanna makes all her teachers study, that we have to talk about, and we talk about Jung also, the way that the West and the East, parts of the world think, but this is for later on. So we have collectively, in small groups, differences, but in a deeper level, the heritage is, all of us. It's for, humankind. So in the collective works, Jung says, if we cannot deny the archetypes, at each new stage of differentiation, remember evolution that Joanna talks a lot about, our evolution of consciousness. So at each new stage of differentiation of consciousness that civilization reaches, we are faced with the task of finding a new interpretation appropriate to that stage in order to connect the life of the past that is within us, we cannot deny, it's deep within us, which still exists in us, with the life of the present, which threatens to detach itself from it. We are always in the middle because we are evolving. So there is this differentiation process of going on in our consciousness. See that I told you to read Modern Man in Search of a Soul, and Lionel Corbett said it's a great book. So there Jung talks about this. And we are faced with this task of finding a new interpretation appropriate to this new stage that we find ourselves in the present moment. Always, man, women, humankind finds always itself in a certain moment of our evolutionary process. And we all have to connect the life of the past with the life of the present. So the archetypes, little by little, are of course expanding, if we could say, are evolving as we are evolving, okay? So I thought that this movie would be a great example. It's a Winter's Tale. It's an American movie based in a novel by Mark Halperin from 1983. I know that Shakespeare has Winter Tale play, but it's not the same, as far as I know. So in this movie, there are lots of archetypal images, because the guy is an orphan here, Colin Farrell, okay. He is Peter, I think it's his name in the movie. And he's an orphan that grows up in, I think it's the 19th century in New York, Manhattan. And this guy here in the left raised him, okay? But he's the bad guy, let's say. So it's all about, and he's in the black horse, if you could say. So we have here an image, lots of dualities, we could say, but we have the white horse, we have the black horse, so we have the good and evil, okay? We have the light and dark, we have angels and demons, we have all these archetypal issues, okay, that it's they are timeless, and they are, you know, they happen out of space and time to all of us in our evolutionary process, okay? And we also have, okay, this is the main actress, Jessica Findlay, I think it's her name, the actress. And so it's Beverly, it's her name. So for instance, an archetypal content, of course, love is an archetype that it's within all of us, okay? It will express itself in our lives in different manners. Again, according to our level of consciousness, our particular level of consciousness about what's love for me, about, you know, the culture that the family issues that I have, the culture that I have been born in. But we all have, okay, images and thoughts, emotions connected to this word love, for instance. So love is a way of evolution, for instance, is an issue. We all know that love leads us to someplace. Okay, if I am a very jealous person, for instance, then love will manifest in my life as a complex, related to a complex, for instance, the loving energy will manifest in my life as an energy of a complex. Maybe it's from my inner child. Maybe I have a very problematic Electra complex, to talk about a complex that Freud describes. Maybe I have some kind of problem in this area, or maybe I have a very bad or difficult mother complex. And then love will, or that, for instance, I could have an experience in my family, early family, or where my mother, for instance, I watched my mother fighting my father, for instance, just an example that occurred to me, because of jealousy, okay? And this could get attached to my mother complex, this experience of jealousy, of a partnership where I'm always doubtful of my partner, for instance. And then I grow up not actually not aware of the intensity of this. And actually, if culture says it's okay to be jealous because then you are strong and you are going to fight, for instance, for the person that you love, then I won't even pay attention. I will think that it's all right for me to be jealous, you know. But then I get in a partnership, and then I get jealous, really jealous at some point of my partner, and I lose control. And then I fight and I say things that I regret later on. And I think, how could I have said this? That doesn't make sense. Because then it's an example of a complex that, as we were talking, just opened the door of consciousness and took control. But remember that in the core of our complex, that there is an archetypal situation. So, for instance, the love that we share in a partnership, We all have this experience. It doesn't matter which partnership, which way, because we are beings that we need to interrelate to each other. So this is an archetypal situation to be able to share love. But in my own, in this example, for instance, my own personal life, a personal life of the person that has this problem of jealousy, it has manifested itself as jealousy. So it's the sick love, let's say, you know, the possessive, the infantile, the childish love that was connected to some of my complex, not only the mother complex, but for instance, also my child, inner child complex, okay? Because the inner child grew up looking at the fight between father and mother in this example, all right? So I hope this is, we can go ahead, but we can, in the questions, we can see a little bit more. And this is a beautiful images of this movie, because this is Peter, but in another time, and he has lost his memory. So he draws the moon, and he draws a woman's face with the hand trying to reach for the moon. And it's deep inside of him, but he doesn't have any memory of who the woman is. So he goes through an ordeal to a lot of things, and afterwards he realized that it's this little girl. When he watches the little girl falling asleep and reaching for a light outside in the street. I think, I'm not sure it's the moon or it's a street light. And this little girl has cancer, and it's terminal cancer. She's dying. So then suddenly he knows why he was kept alive. And this is Jennifer Cohen, she plays the little girl mother. And one of the final scenes where he faces his enemy, the bad guy, the demon, whatever, the dark father, you have a lot of ways to think of archetypally speaking, and saves the little girl, okay? So I brought to you, in the end of the movie, there is this beautiful a lady, you know, the narrator, I think you call it, saying these beautiful sentences. What if we are all unique and the universe loves us all equally? So much so that it bends over backwards across the centuries for each and every one of us, and sometimes we are just lucky enough to see it. No life is more important than another, and nothing has been without purpose. Nothing. What if we are all part of a great pattern that we may someday understand? And one day, when we alone are capable of doing what we were supposed to do by ourselves, we get to rise up and reunite with those we have loved the most, forever embraced. I think it's so beautiful. And I think it's a very, I don't know how the critics could not, you know, pay attention to that, but well, anyway, it's our collective, suffering collective, unconscious. But anyway, it's all in here, our evolution, the understanding that we are all deeply connected in a way that our small consciousness can't even understand. But that's and there is that we are all part of a great pattern that we may someday understand. And one day when we alone, so Jung talks about our own myth, personal myth, our sacred story, okay? So when we alone are capable of doing what we were supposed to do by ourselves, then we get to rise up and reunite with those we have loved the most, forever embraced. So our mind, we are heading to the end, but I want to explain a little more about the archetypes. Our mind is guided by a system of forms, the archetypes, which are powerful even if they don't carry mass, and which are real even if invisible, because they are, from the psych dimension. So archetypes are transpersonal ordering principles in the psyche, according to Jung. They are natural constants, pre-existing, self-organizing forces within the psyche whose origin is unknown. We don't know the origin. So the archetypes exist in a psychic system, as we have seen previously, of a collective, universal, and impersonal nature. The autonomous, or what Jung called the objective psyche, objective because it's there that we are what we really are, okay? The subjective psyche would be the personality, how we understand each other here in this life, how we define it, ourselves, okay? So that would be the subjective and perceive ourselves, subjective psyche. And the objective psyche would be the autonomous level, or the psyche, or the collective unconscious. It's all the same, okay, people? So from this system, invisible forms can appear in our minds and guide our imagination, perception, and thought, as it happened to Peter, for instance. He had an archetypal vision in the present of the movie, not in the past. The movie happens in two timelines. And he draws, obsessively, the woman, the face of the woman trying to reach for the moon. So that was an archetypal image, of course, also from death and rebirth. These are archetypal issues, okay, within our psyche. Dying, we all know that we are going to die. We are deep in our psyche, we have a knowledge of what is dying. And we also know what rebirth is. Actually, we are having this sacred holiday, I think, all over the world about the rebirth of Jesus, right? So this is an archetypal situation that it's, as we said previously, that, for instance, consciousness is always being born from the unconscious. Okay, as we talked previously when we were talking about consciousness and the unconscious. So these are archetypal themes, images, okay, that are deep within our psyche. So from this system, invisible forms can appear in our minds and guide our imagination, perception, and thought. For Joanna now, the remarkable observation and decoding of archetypes elucidate a significant number of conflicts and phenomena that occur in the conduct of human beings, with these psychological roots being planted in the individual unconscious by the inheritance stratified in the collective. Okay. See, people, Joanna is going even further than Jung. That's because it's so wonderful. We are so grateful for this beautiful light teacher. She's going further, even further. Jung was considered still for a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists that are materialistic as a new age, whatever, and in a very bad way. They call a mystical person because they can't understand what Jung is talking about. Imagine Joanna. So we need to study a lot. So imagine all these people trying to understand what Joanna is talking about. That's why we have to study all of these authors, and we have to understand, because Joanna is trying to connect us, to connect all this knowledge together with the Spiritist psychology, so that we can have further understanding of ourselves, actually. Where do we come from to where we are heading? What are we doing here? Okay. So Joanna says that the remarkable observation and decoding of archetypes, okay, that Jung and his colleagues in his lifetime did, elucidate a significant number of conflicts and phenomena that occur in the conduct of human beings that are occurring to these days, with these psychological roots. So the roots being planted in the individual unconscious by the inheritance stratified in the collective. So let's look a little further. This is in the book Personal Triumph. In this infinite ocean of dormant information, where consciousness appear in reduced expression, victimized by the successive waves provided by the winds of archives full of data, emerge archetypal images of mythological personifications that constitute the triggering matrices of human behavior. From the primordial archetype or image, therefore, according to Karl Gustav Jung, all others emerge. And I know, because many, many years ago when I met Lionel Corbett, that he had never heard about Joanna or Spiritist psychology. But the first time that he actually came to Brazil, he showed this slide that is totally connected to what Joanna is saying. I don't think I have shown this previously to you. We talked about the iceberg, but this is Lionel Corbett slide from 2016. So it's consciousness and levels of unconscious. We have seen something similar, but see how it connects to what Joanna is saying. Realize the images that she's telling us to connect in this sentence. So the dormant information where consciousness appears in reduced expression. See? So there's a dormant information here, and consciousness comes from this bottom of this wave, okay, of possibilities. So victimized by the successive waves of this ocean, has a lot of waves, all of us, all of our consciousness together, our deep consciousness, our higher consciousness, provided by the winds of archives full of data. So from all of this emerge archetypal images of mythological personifications that constitute the triggering matrices of human behavior. So from a primordial, deep within, in the depths we cannot establish, okay? That's Corbett and other authors call the level of the autonomous or transpersonal unconscious. So that would be the transpersonal dimension of the psyche, the objective psyche, how you can choose how you are the collective unconscious. So the primordial images are deep within this level of this dimension of the psyche, where all of our higher consciousness are, okay? And deep from this bottom, okay, emerge, you see, like a wave going up, up, so emerge our personal, our personal, let's say, combination of archetypes that will lead our existence of the existence of this personality, okay? And that will manifest itself and be active and activate, if we can say, some complexes that will be activated, constellated, as Jung says, in different situations in our lifetime, in this lifetime, for this ego, okay? So this is another slide, Lionel Corbett's slide, that many individuals, they are interreaction, they are interreaction, and they are interacting deep within the transpersonal psyche. So we are all interconnected, okay, in this deeper level. So this is a beautiful book of Lionel Corbett, and I really think everybody should try to read, actually, because he's coming here to give us some classes, but more in the end of the course. So it's called Psyche and the Sacred, Spirituality Beyond Religion. And where Lionel says, above the surface of the water, the waves, he's explaining the graphic, the drawing. So above the surface of the water, the waves appear as separate formation, but at their base, they all merge into the larger ocean. He's going down, okay, in this explanation. Similarly, in its totality, the psyche encompasses far more than just each individual's experiences. Though we usually have the sense of being separate individuals, we are all nonetheless connected to each other at the transpersonal level of the psyche, even if we are unaware of it. Consciousness as a whole is seamless. Each individual's consciousness draws upon and is continuous with the underlying totality of consciousness, tells us Lionel. Just as each individual breathes air into his or her lungs and is at the same time surrounded by the air in the atmosphere, which permeates everything. In the Hindu tradition, the transpersonal level of consciousness is known as Brahman. In the West, we might call it the mind of God. In Jungian psychology, this larger field of consciousness is referred to as the objective psyche, as we have seen, or the autonomous psyche. Jung originally called, according to Lionel, and we have seen, the collective unconscious. The larger psyche is called autonomous because it acts independently of human consciousness. We can experience it, but we cannot control it. For Jung, the autonomous objective psyche is either the medium for the transmission of numinous experiences, the sacred experiences. Lionel will be talking to us about numinous experiences, from a transcendent divinity beyond the psyche. Remember the graphic? So beyond the transpersonal dimension, or a numinous experience may be a direct encounter with the autonomous objective psyche itself, like the ego having a direct encounter with the autonomous psyche. We cannot be sure which of these possibilities is correct. In practice, the distinction is not important. When we have a numinous experience, as an experience of the sacred, we feel as if we are being addressed by a consciousness that is different from our own. At a deeper level, however, just as the wave is part of the ocean, the experiencing ego is not really separate from the larger consciousness. The separation is only for us to have an understanding, but everything, as I told you in the beginning, is connected, and we cannot actually separate from one another. We can observe the facts, as Jung says, but and describe and deal with them, the psychic facts, but we cannot actually separate and look in the microscope or whatever. So for Joanna, in a spiritist analysis around the archetypes, it is about legacies of experiences lived in past reincarnations, when the spirit transferred, even without realizing it, the memories to the unconscious, archiving there all the memories of accomplishments, desires, frustrations, conquests, and losses, allowing the emergence of future primordial images. Remember, connecting the past to the future. So we are all evolving, and our consciousness is evolving, of course, together with our spirit is evolving, with the evolution of the spirit. So, which corresponds to the events momentarily dormant in the spirit and ignored by consciousness. So, as I told you before, Joanna goes further, and she says, no brain would be able to store all the formulations of the different periods of evolution, considering the limits of the physiological apparatus, even with its unusual complexity. It would be to attribute divine functions and possibilities to it, surpassing its human conditioning. For instance, I think everybody knows this image of the left brain and the right brain. We say that the left brain is academic, it's logical, sequential, rational. Math and science are from the left brain. Analytical, objective, uses logic, facts, rule, words and language, present and past. Before, when Fabrizio has the recording, and the right brain, so it's creative. So the big picture oriented, looks at wholes, random, intuitive, holistic. Philosophy and spiritualism, for instance, are from the right part of the brain. Subjective, uses feeling, imagination rules, symbols, possibilities, spatial perceptions. Okay, it's adventures and carefree. Some students, when I present this slide, say, oh, so the left brain is boring and the right brain is great. I don't know. I think we need, balance between the left brain and the right brain, but we can discuss this later. So for Joanna, the Spiritist view, however, regarding an extracerebral archive, the subtle body, and the subtle brain that has the subtle brain, formed by an energetic machinery centered on the self or spirit, whose field of information is infinite, becomes much more feasible and rational. Okay. And Joanna says, externalized by the unconscious through subtle cerebral mechanisms, these occurrences, the one that she was talking about, accomplishment, desires, frustrations, conquests, and losses, for instance, reappear as complexes when they have disturbing content, natural effects of iniquitous moral actions that the sovereign laws of cause and effect impose on the spirit as a need for repair and re-education. Remember that I told you that Joanna goes further than Jung, because Jung talks about the complex being aspects dissociated from consciousness because of a moral conflict, remember, from the beginning. And this happens in the unconscious level, but Joanna is saying that all this unconscious accomplishment, desires, contents, okay, reappear as complexes when they have disturbing contents, natural, that she's going to say that they are not only from this life, they are natural effects of iniquitous moral actions that the sovereign laws of cause and effect impose on the spirit as a need for repair and re-education. So for Joanna, the evolutionary concept of the spiritual principle that will become the self when the being becomes human contemplates the Jungian proposal expanding the existential horizons to infinity, whose origins are lost in the beginning of creation, corresponding to the primordial archetypes which are found in God, from whom all proceeds. And for the end, the notion of a transpersonal or spiritual dimension, this is Lionel speaking in The Psyche and the Sacred, our spiritual dimension of the psyche is one of Jung's major contributions to Western psychology. We participate in this dimension in much the same way that the fishes live in the ocean. We are immersed in the psyche, but we do not know how far it extends. He's saying, and he has never read Joanna, people, okay? He's saying the same thing. As far as we know, the transpersonal psyche may permeate the entire world of nature and even the entire cosmos. So I brought this image for the final. For Joanna, however, the uninterrupted growth of consciousness that comes from the most primary forms in which the psyche was embryonic, in deep sleep, unconscious of itself and everything around it, carries from one to another expression of life the ancestral legacies that come to constitute its immense heritage, to be decoded when in its humanity the spirit reaches the noble level of full consciousness, a step that will raise it to angelitude, which will lead it to the world of the initial light, from where the uncreated removes the constitutive elements of the universe, generating everything. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful sentence, Joanna's sentence that, summarize everything. And just, I want to acclimate you with the synchronicities that happen in all these Joanna classes. I took this picture from a garden up our hills. The city is called Gramado, here in the very south of Brazil. And there's this butterfly in the middle. So it's a garden. And when I was just translating for you all Joanna's sentences, it came in my mind, this picture. And I love this guy. He's one of our dearest poets here in Porto Alegre, in the south of Brazil, of course, in Brazilian culture. And this is Mario Quintana saying, the secret is not to run after the butterflies. It's to take care of the garden so that they come to you. I know that a lot of authors have said something similar, but Mario Quintana was born in the beginning of the 20th century, and he has been dead for many decades. But his spirit was able to cut an archetype situation of us as taking care of our inner garden and being able to call the butterflies. And the butterfly is an archetypal image for the development of the soul. Thank you so much. And let's go to the questions to the people that will be around. And bye-bye to everybody who is at home.